felt like life is just like serving up a big plate of chaos and you're just trying to like wrestle it into some semblance of order?
Yeah.
Well, that's what we're diving into today with Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life,
Okay.
to see how he suggests we do just that.
Right.
And you know Peterson, right?
Yeah.
He's that psychologist who's always got everyone like fired up and talking.
Oh, yeah. He's everywhere these days.
Lobsters, religion, everything in between.
Yeah. Well, he's got this really interesting way of connecting those big, like, universal experiences.
Yeah.
The things that we all kind of, like, quietly freak out about sometimes. Like,
Right.
what's the point of it all?
Yeah.
And 12 Rules is a really great starting point because it's a bit more accessible than some of his other work. Like Maps of Meaning comes to mind. But it still grapples with some of those big existential questions.
Yeah, and he does it with this like infectious energy.
Oh, totally.
You can tell this guy like lives for this stuff.
It does.
He's got that clinical psych background.
Yeah.
But he's pulling from history, philosophy, even religion,
Yeah.
to kind of help us understand ourselves a little better.
Well, and that's one of the things that I find so fascinating about Peterson is that he's not afraid to challenge the status quo.
Oh, no, he is not.
Like, remember that whole thing with the literary agent
Oh, yeah.
who basically said that the goal of life is just happiness?
Yeah.
And Peterson's like, no way.
Yeah.
It's way too simplistic.
It's so much more than that.
Especially when life throws you those curveballs, because it always does.
Right.
It always does.
It's like he sees millennials wrestling with these two extremes. On the one hand, you've got this like everything is relative morality, where no one wants to rock the boat or say what they actually think for fear of judgment.
Right.
And then on the other hand, you've got this like rigid dogma.
Yeah.
It's my way or the highway.
Yeah.
And it's very short on wisdom and very long on judgment.
Totally. And it's like he's trying to carve out a space between those two extremes.
Yeah.
He's not claiming to have all the answers.
Right.
But he's offering, I think, a really refreshing perspective that's
Yeah.
based on, his research, his observations,
Right.
his clinical experience.
Yeah. And he's definitely not afraid to stir the pot,
No.
especially when he talks about these forces of order and chaos.
Yeah.
These like fundamental elements that he thinks shape our lives. And I keep thinking about that wild dream he had where he's like hanging onto a chandelier for dear life
Oh, yeah.
in this like huge cathedral.
Yeah.
And he talked about it as a metaphor
Yeah.
for finding that balance
Mhm.
between like not clinging to these outdated beliefs,
Yeah.
but also not just throwing out all systems of value either.
Right. Well, that's Peterson in a nutshell, isn't it?
It really is.
He's always searching for that middle ground, that third option.
Right.
He's not advocating for blind faith or like rigid tradition,
Right.
but he is cautioning against throwing the baby out with the bathwater
Right.
when it comes to like meaning and structure in our lives.
Right. And then he throws this curveball
Okay.
and he starts talking about how even lobsters
Okay.
can teach us something about being human.
Hmm.
And I'm thinking lobsters.
Yeah.
Okay.
What do they know?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But he makes this really interesting point
Okay.
about how even lobsters, with their simple little brains,
Right.
have these like complex dominance hierarchies,
Okay.
just like us.
Mhm.
And get this, when a lobster loses a fight,
Okay.
its brain literally dissolves and regrows
What?
to fit its new lower status position.
Wow.
It's wild.
That is wild.
Like it makes you wonder how much of our own behavior,
Yeah.
like our striving for status and recognition,
Right.
is kind of hardwired into us.
Is that nature
Yeah, is that nature?
versus nurture?
Yeah.
Right.
And he connects this to something called Price's Law,
Okay.
which you might have heard of as like the Pareto principle
Mm.
or the 80-20 rule.
Right. The 80-20 rule. Yeah.
The whole like the rich get richer idea.
Exactly.
Right.
And so it's this principle that pops up everywhere.
Yeah.
Business art life.
Yeah.
Where a small percentage of people end up with a large percentage of the resources or the success or what have you.
Right.
And it ties into his argument that this drive for status, for dominance,
Yeah.
it's not just some social construct,
Yeah.
but something that's like deeply rooted in our biology.
Yeah, like those lobsters.
Just like those lobsters, exactly.
Okay, so we're hardwired for hierarchy.
Yeah.
But does that mean we're stuck?
Well, that's the question, isn't it?
Right.
And Peterson would actually challenge this idea that nature is like fixed and unchanging.
Okay.
He likes to use the Taoist symbol of yin and yang.
Oh, yeah.
You know that circle with the black and white teardrops kind of swirling into each other?
Yeah.
He says that's a much better representation of how nature actually works.
Okay.
It's this dance between order and chaos,
Okay.
this constant interplay between change and stability.
So it's not just this like nature equals destiny,
Perfect.
like you're stuck.
Exactly.
You're a lobster, deal with it.
Well, not a lobster, you're a human.
Okay, good to know.
There's hope for you.
Okay.
But he does point out that even within nature, different elements change at different rates.
Okay.
Right? So think about it.
Right.
Leaves change faster than trees. Trees faster than forests.
Right.
Weather patterns faster than the overall climate.
Right.
So it's this interconnected web of change that's happening at multiple levels.
Okay, so then where do we fit into all this change?
Well, that is the question.
Right.
And how do we handle the pressure of all this change?
Yeah, because change is stressful.
It is stressful, absolutely.
It is.
And this is where Peterson introduces this idea of the ancient brain counter.
The what?
The ancient brain counter.
Okay.
And this is basically this primitive part of our brains that's constantly assessing and reacting to stress.
Okay.
And he argues that living at the bottom of a hierarchy where you're constantly facing uncertainty and threat can really take a toll, not just mentally, but physically.
Interesting. Okay, so more stress, higher body count on the ancient brain counter.
Basically, it's like your body goes into this like constant state of emergency preparedness, which burns through resources and leaves you feeling drained, anxious, maybe more impulsive, even a weakened immune system.
Wow.
It's like your body's way of saying, hey, something's got to give. Something's got to change.
Yeah, like your body is waving the white flag.
Yeah,
exactly.
I can't keep up with this level of stress.
Right. It's almost like that feeling you get when you're stuck in traffic, right?
Oh, yeah.
And you can like feel your blood pressure rising.
Totally.
But in this case, it's your place in the pecking order that's causing the stress.
Exactly. And this is where Peterson introduces the concept of feedback loops.
Okay.
And he compares it to that ear-splitting screech you hear at a concert when the microphone gets too close to the speaker.
Oh,
It's this runaway effect, right?
Right.
And he argues that similar loops can happen in our lives, often showing up as things like anxiety, addiction, or other mental health challenges.
So how does that actually play out in real life, though?
Well, he uses the example of alcohol addiction.
Okay.
So it starts with that initial feeling of relief or exhilaration.
Right.
But then comes the craving, the withdrawal, and the urge to use, again, just to feel normal.
Right.
It's this vicious cycle, this positive feedback loop that's incredibly difficult to break free from.
And it's not just with substances, right? He also talks about how even something like a panic attack, which is scary enough on its own, can spiral into like full-blown agoraphobia.
Exactly. It's like your brain misinterprets those anxiety signals.
Okay.
And it throws gasoline on the fire. You start avoiding situations that trigger the panic.
Right.
Which only reinforces the fear.
Right.
And keeps you trapped in that loop.
Right. So it's like this self-fulfilling prophecy almost.
Exactly. And so Peterson's point is that these mental health challenges aren't just all in your head.
Okay.
They're deeply connected to our biology, our environment, and these powerful feedback loops that can really take on a life of their own.
So we've got lobsters.
We do.
We've got feedback loops.
Yes.
And now organ transplants.
Oh.
He makes this comparison about transplant patients who actually refuse to take their anti-rejection meds.
Oh, wow.
Which sounds crazy.
Yeah, that's pretty wild.
But he uses it as like this metaphor for self-sabotage.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
It's like our minds can reject positive change too.
Oh.
Like we cling to this familiar misery.
Right.
Even when it's harmful.
Because it's what we know.
Yeah.
It's comfortable.
Yeah, we avoid responsibility.
Yeah.
We ignore our needs.
Right.
And we end up rejecting the very things that could help us to heal and grow.
Powerful.
Right.
Really powerful.
And speaking of powerful images, Peterson delves into the biblical story of the Garden of Eden.
Okay.
Not in like a literal sense, but as this like symbolic representation of human consciousness.
Right.
And the choices that we make.
Okay.
So, you know, Adam and Eve eating from the tree of knowledge.
Yeah.
They become aware of good and evil.
Mm-hmm.
But they also open themselves up to shame.
Right.
Guilt, suffering.
It's that classic ignorance is bliss kind of.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like animals operate on instinct.
Right. They don't have that same awareness of their own fragility.
Right. They just are.
Right.
Whereas humans, we know we're going to die.
Right.
And that knowledge shapes our entire experience.
It's true.
Right? It makes us capable of great love and compassion,
right?
But also of incredible cruelty.
It's a double-edged sword.
It is.
This knowledge.
Yeah, it is.
So how do we handle it?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right.
And Peterson really emphasizes the importance of respect
Okay.
discipline, and moral development.
Okay.
And he tells this story about his childhood friend Chris,
Okay.
who struggled with addiction,
Right.
lack of direction. And it really highlights, I think, the consequences of not having that strong sense of self
Yeah.
or that moral compass.
It's that feeling of being adrift.
Yes, of not knowing where you fit in.
Exactly.
And I think that's something that a lot of people can relate to.
Absolutely. Especially, I think, when we're young and trying to figure out, who we are, what we want out of life. And Peterson would argue that finding that path, developing self-discipline, and choosing a direction for your life, even if it means questioning the status quo, is absolutely essential for growth and fulfillment.
So how do we find that path?
Well, he warns against falling into this trap of thinking that we can just help our way to meaning. You can't just be a good person and then suddenly everything falls into place. He uses this cautionary tale from Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground about this guy whose attempts to help a young woman backfire spectacular, right?
Good intentions only get you so far, I guess.
Exactly. Good intentions aren't always enough. And Peterson argues that surrounding yourself with people who are striving to make the world a better place, who embody those values of honesty, integrity, personal responsibility, is actually crucial.
So it's not about being selfish.
No.
It's about recognizing that, we influence each other.
Exactly. We're all connected.
It's like that whole, be the change you want to see.
Exactly.
In the world.
That's it.
Right.
Peterson uses the example of Michelangelo's David. That iconic statue of the biblical hero. He says that striving for that level of excellence, of embodying those ideals, it inspires others to reach their own potential.
But what about those times when we feel inadequate?
Oh, yeah.
We're constantly comparing ourselves to others. And coming up short.
Sure, we all have that inner critic, right?
Oh, yeah.
That voice telling us we're not good enough, not smart enough, not successful enough.
Yes.
And Peterson acknowledges that, we're not all equal in terms of our abilities and outcomes. But he argues that there are healthier ways to measure success than constant comparison.
So it's about finding your own lane.
Exactly.
Instead of chasing after someone else's definition of success.
Exactly. It's about recognizing your own unique strengths and limitations. And striving for growth and meaning in the areas that matter most to you.
So it's kind of turning inward a little bit.
It is.
Instead of always looking outward.
It's about asking yourself, what could I do that I would do to make life a little better?
I like that.
It's a good question, right?
It is a good question.
It's a lot more empowering, I think, than just trying to keep up with the Joneses.
Absolutely.
Right. And so Peterson really encourages this proactive approach to life. Don't wait for someone else to fix things, he says. Start with yourself. Align yourself with truth. Seek out the good. And take action. Even if it's just one small step at a time.
One day at a time.
One day at a time.
One step at a time.
That's it.
Okay.
So it's about taking responsibility, both for ourselves and for the world around us.
And that brings us to another one of Peterson's thought-provoking observations. He talks about this phenomenon of skate stoppers.
Skate stoppers.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know those little metal brackets you see on public structures?
Oh, yeah. To deter skateboarders?
Oh, exactly.
Okay.
And they're everywhere.
They are everywhere.
And he sees them as this symbol of our society's increasing aversion to risk.
Interesting.
This tendency to eliminate any possibility of danger or discomfort, even if it means sacrificing freedom and spontaneity.
It's like we're so afraid of getting hurt or making a mistake that we end up stifling creativity and adventure.
There's we're wrapping our kids in bubble wrap.
Totally.
But life has a way of popping those bubbles.
It does.
All right?
It always does.
So then how do we find that balance between protecting people and preparing them for the realities of life?
Well, Peterson would suggest that we need to be more willing to let go, to allow for risk-taking, and even failure, and to trust that people, especially young people, are more resilient than we often give them credit for.
It's about giving them the tools and the support they need to navigate the world.
Absolutely.
But also giving them the freedom
to
make their own choices and learn from their experiences.
Precisely. And I think this ties back into Peterson's broader message about the importance of personal responsibility, of owning our choices, accepting the consequences of our actions, both good and bad.
So it's about empowering people
Yes.
to become like active agents
Exactly.
in their own lives.
Yes.
Rather than these like passive recipients
All right.
of whatever fate throws their way.
You are not a lobster.
I am not a lobster.
You get to write your own story.
I love it. Okay, it's like you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day.
Right.
Teach a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime.
Exactly.
But in this case, it's not just about fishing.
Right.
It's about like navigating the complexities of life.
Absolutely. And Peterson is all about equipping people with the tools they need to thrive,
Right.
not just to survive.
Right.
And sometimes those tools involve facing some hard truths
Right.
about ourselves and about the world.
And one of those hard truths is that like life isn't always fair.
No, it's not.
Right?
It's
People
full
get
of-
dealt a bad hand.
Yeah.
Things happen.
Things happen that are outside of our control. And sometimes bad things happen to good people.
Right. And Peterson doesn't shy away from that.
No.
He doesn't shy away from the problem of suffering.
He doesn't.
In fact, he tackles it head on,
Yes.
drawing on his own experiences,
Right.
including like his daughter's long struggle with this debilitating illness.
Yeah. And it's in those moments
Oh,
where you
my.
really see, I think, the depth of his thinking.
Yeah.
Because it's so personal
Mm.
and it's so heartbreaking.
Yeah.
But it also gets to the heart, I think, of what it means to be human,
Right.
to grapple with those existential questions
Right. Like why?
of why we suffer.
Why bad things happen.
Why are we here?
Yeah. And like, how do we make sense of it all?
Exactly. And it's a question
Certainly.
that has haunted, philosophers and theologians
Right. For centuries.
for centuries.
Does Peterson offer any answers?
Well, he doesn't claim to have all the answers,
Right.
but he offers, I think, a really unique perspective.
Okay.
He talks about how limitations,
Okay.
even those that cause us pain and frustration,
Mm-hmm.
can actually be sources of meaning and growth.
That's an interesting take.
It is, isn't it?
It seems counterintuitive,
It does.
right? Because most of us spend our lives trying to overcome limitations.
Right. We want to transcend.
Yeah.
We want to be limitless.
Not embrace them.
Right. And Peterson uses this great example
Okay.
of Superman,
Okay.
and he argues that Superman's unlimited power
Okay.
actually undermines his heroism.
Interesting.
Right. Because if you can do anything,
Right.
if you're completely invulnerable,
Yeah.
there's no real challenge.
There's no risk.
There's no risk.
Right.
And ultimately, there's no real meaning
Wow.
in your actions.
It's like those stories you hear about like people who wish for unlimited wealth
Right.
and then they realize
And then they're miserable
they're miserable.
because it costs them
Right.
their relationship,
Their health.
their health,
Your purpose.
their sense of purpose. Exactly.
Right. So it's almost like
It's a paradox.
it is a paradox.
But Peterson's suggesting that it's our vulnerabilities,
Okay.
our imperfections that make us human,
Okay.
that make us capable of empathy,
Okay.
compassion,
Mm-hmm.
love.
So it's not about erasing our limitations.
Yeah,
It's about like finding meaning and purpose within them.
exactly.
Right.
And this actually ties into, I think, another really important theme.
Okay.
In Peterson's work, and that is the importance of truth-telling,
Okay.
both to ourselves and to
Mhm.
others.
Honesty.
Honesty.
Yeah.
And he tells this great story about working with this client
Okay.
who was very paranoid,
Yeah.
convinced that everyone was out to get him.
Oh, wow.
And instead of humoring this client
Right.
or dismissing his delusions,
Yeah.
Peterson chose to engage with him honestly,
Wow.
even if it meant challenging his perceptions.
Well, that sounds like a risky move.
It was.
Yeah.
But Peterson argues that this kind of radical honesty,
Yeah.
even when it's difficult,
Yeah.
is crucial for building trust
Right.
and creating the space for real change.
So it's about confronting reality head on.
Yes.
Even when it's painful, even when it's uncomfortable. Exactly. And that leads into another one of Peterson's
Right.
kind of intriguing ideas.
Okay.
This concept he calls outsourcing sanity.
Outsourcing sanity.
Outsourcing sanity.
What does that mean?
So he argues that we all rely on the feedback of others
Okay.
to some extent
When
to
you-
regulate our behavior
Right.
and to make sure that we're not completely
Off the rails.
off the rails,
Wait.
crazy.
That's like that feeling when you walk into a room
Yeah,
and everyone stops talking and stares at you.
exactly.
And you're like, oh my gosh,
What's wrong with me?
what's wrong with me?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Did I forget to put pants on?
Right, exactly.
You know,
Yeah.
we're social creatures.
We are. We're
Yeah.
wired for connection
Mhm.
and belonging
So how do we find that balance then?
between like staying connected to others,
Yeah.
but also like staying true to ourselves.
Well, Peterson would say that it starts with honesty,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
Being willing to kind of look in the mirror
Right.
and to face those parts of ourselves that
Yeah.
we'd rather keep hidden.
The shadow self.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's about developing a strong internal compass,
Okay.
a set of values and principles
Mm-hmm.
that guide our actions,
Right.
even when it's difficult, even when it's unpopular.
Right. So instead of outsourcing our sanity,
Yes.
we need to like cultivate it from within.
Exactly. It's
And-
about becoming our own
Yes.
source of strength, integrity,
Mhm.
wisdom.
I love it.
So where do we go from here?
Right. Like how do
We put all of this
put this into practice?
into practice.
Right.
Well, I think Peterson ends 12 Rules for Life
Okay.
with a really powerful call to action.
Okay.
He asks this question,
Okay.
what could I do that I would do
Yeah.
to make life a little bit better?
I love that.
It's such a simple question,
It is.
but it's so profound.
It is.
And it's a question that each of us has to answer for ourselves.
So it's not about these grand gestures.
No.
It's about the small things.
The small things.
The everyday things.
Exactly. And it might be as simple as making your bed
Right.
or calling a friend.
Yeah.
It might be something more challenging, like
Yeah.
having a difficult conversation
Right.
or confronting a fear.
Right.
But it's those small,
The small things.
everyday choices.
Yeah.
Those seemingly insignificant actions
Right.
that ultimately shape who we are
I love it.
and who you're becoming.
That's a great place to wrap up our deep dive
It is.
into the work of Jordan Peterson.
It really is.
So, until next time,
Yes.
keep asking those tough questions
Keep those questions coming.
and keep diving deep.
Dive deep, my friend.